Hi, it's Heather from Thicketworks, and today we're going to build this mini classical door surround. This piece is sized to work with the Secret Garden door created in an earlier video. There'll be a link in the description if you missed that one. Be sure to download and cut your SVG files. You'll find them for free at the linked blog post. Alright, let's get started with today's build. This is what the piece will look like before it's finished, but after it's assembled. It nestles perfectly around the Secret Garden door. This piece of miniature architecture is incredibly sturdy when it's finished because it's made of a lot of layers. It's simplest to group these into three sections. Two sections that have the formal door surround with 4 layers each, and a middle section that has apertures for a magnet and for the hinges. There's a blank frame for either side of this stack, then 2 that have the cutout for a magnet, 2 in the very center that also have a cutout for the hinges, and then another stack of 2 that have only the cutout for the magnet. I know, it's a lot of layers, but the assembly goes really quickly. In addition to the main frames, you'll need a lot of super glue and these little tiny pieces that are included in the cut files. Let's begin with the 2 central panels, the ones that will make a frame for the hinges. These get layered together, and after lots of trial and error, I found that the most accurate method is to affix one side with super glue, get it properly aligned, and then move on to the other side. We'll be building up this basic framework in 2 halves, beginning with this section that has the divot for the magnet and for the hinges. Now we're going to layer that together with 2 of the frames that just have the cutout for the magnet, like this. Again, I'm gluing one half of the construction and then the other. Now we can put the face frame on the bottom of this stack. Okay, so that's one half of the inner assembly. We're going to repeat the procedure on the other side. The only difference is that there are no cutouts for hinges on this side, only those with the divots for the magnet. Once these first 2 sections have been laminated together, we'll add a plain face frame on the opposite side. Now, it's important to keep the orientation correct so that it captures the magnet when we put the 2 halves together. So the face frame will go on the bottom of this stack. I'm choosing to work with super glue rather than a PVA glue for this operation because it will not warp or buckle this very thin chipboard. And at the same time, it will create a very strong bond and transform this flimsy material into something that resembles wood. Now you see the 2 inner halves of the inner construction. We'll be setting these aside for now. We will not be joining them until the very end of the process. Now let's laminate together all of the layers required to create the classical door surround. Now the profile on these is a little more elaborate, so give yourself plenty of time to line things up. Again, working one side and then the other is extremely helpful when it comes to alignment. The blank piece goes first, and the second one in the stack is the one with the small oval cutout. On top of that goes the pediment with the triangular cutout at the top. Do your best to line up the profile of all of these layers. The uppermost layer creates the impression of fluted columns, and it's a little more flimsy and difficult to work with than the others. Just take your time and use your fingertips to slide everything into alignment. When you're happy, press it down and begin coating the upper surface of all of the exposed chipboard with liquid superglue. If all you have is gel superglue, that will work as well. Liquid's just a little easier to work with. As always, when working with superglue, make sure you have adequate ventilation. I like to use a plastic gift card to help smooth the surface once the glue has been applied. Make sure to get the glue into all of the recesses. You won't believe how much this resembles an elaborately carved piece of wood at the end of the process. Repeat the same stacking order for the other side of the classical door surround, and make sure to coat all of the edges with superglue as well. Now you'll have 4 components, 2 inner frames and 2 outer pediments. At this stage, it's a great idea to take a moment to do a dry fit. This magnet holds the door in the closed position. It fits into the divot on the left, and the hinges slide into the slot on the right-hand side of this innermost layer. That gets sandwiched with the other layer, but again, we won't be actually joining them together until later in the process. The dry fit is what's important right now, and I've discovered that everything fits just a little bit too tightly, so I'm clamping the frames together temporarily and using a file in order to remove enough material so that the door opens and closes smoothly. Now that the business side of things is taken care of, we can move on to the fun stuff. I'm using these wonderful little clips that I've just discovered. They're intended for sewing, but they do a great job of fitting these flimsy pieces in place so I can add superglue right over the top. That definitely creates a strong enough bond, and it ensures correct positioning. All of the little tiny pieces get added onto the top. Now, of course, you don't have to do this, but I really like the way that it calls out all of the architectural detail. At the bottom and the top of the columns are these capitals and bases. There's a single piece that goes on the bottom, and then these 2 separate pieces that get placed on the top. This creates tiny little shadow lines and a little more dimension to the final piece. In my opinion, it's definitely worth the effort. Once all of these little pieces have been firmly fixed in place, add superglue over the top. Next, add these tiny rounded rectangles directly above the top of each fluted column. They are really small and a little finicky to work with, but the effect is so lovely once they're in place. I just love that. And if I can do it with my clumsy hands, you can definitely do it. Again, make sure that they're firmly in place and coat them with superglue. At the top of the pediment, there's this chevron shape. And then you can use the cutouts from the fluted columns to create even more shadow lines on the front of your piece. I have to admit, I have a really hard time disposing of any of the offcuts created by the Cricut Maker. I tend to hoard them, and they can really come in handy. I hadn't planned on adding these at the beginning of the project, but when I saw what an impact they had, I couldn't resist. and ended up adding them atop of the chevron at the very upper layer of the pediment as well. Once the tiny strips of chipboard are in place, press them down firmly and allow the adhesive to set up for just a few minutes. I'm adding superglue over the top of all of the exposed chipboard because I'm going to be doing a lot of distressing and the material needs to be really sturdy. It doesn't take long for the adhesive to cure, and it's really easy to just cut away the exposed ends of these tiny pieces. The inner frame of this door is sized to sandwich a piece of standard foam core. Because the walls of the Secret Garden are made of foam core, that's the size that I needed for my project. If you're working with a different wall material, you can add or subtract layers on the inner frame to accommodate it. Okay, now it's finally time to glue the door into these insets. I just used the same super glue that's been used for the entire project, and then slide the flanges of the hinges into those divots and clamp them briefly. It won't take long for the glue to set up. Meanwhile, I can install the magnet. I'm placing a lot of super glue into that aperture, putting the magnet in place and adding a bit of baking soda to help it cure instantly. Now we can place the other frame over the top, capturing both the hinges and the magnet. It's important to press this very tightly together. So again, I'm reaching for the clamps. I don't know what it is about clamps, but a girl just cannot have too many. Seems like I stop at Harbor Freight every week and pick up at least 4 more. And I'm never sorry. Okay, now that the inner frame is constructed, we can place the classical pedimented outer frame onto it. There's a certain amount of reveal that should be the same on either side. After just a few minutes, the inner frame is firmly attached to the front of the door surround. I just love the way this looks. Now, we won't be joining the two together just yet. Before we do that, it's time to do a little more work on the finish. And that begins with distressing. So grab a sturdy blade and some sanding tools and start creating damage. The doorway to the secret garden has been exposed to the weather and neglected for many years. So you just can't have too much damage. And I can't resist getting even more radical on the other side and experimenting with creating some cracks through what really does look like wood at this point and behaves like it too. This stuff is tough. I love that. Creating these little chips and scraping away at various parts of the facade just makes me happy. I don't know what that says about my character, but it's just the way it is. Next comes a wash of thinned black acrylic craft paint over just about the entire facade. Once that gets slathered on, I wipe most of it away with a manky old shop rag. And once that layer has dried, I'm going to come in with some thinned, vivid green. This will be the base layer for a moss texture. And while the paint is still wet, I'm sprinkling pulverized cilantro leaves over the top and tapping away the excess. Then I spray a bit of isopropyl alcohol directly onto the dried herbs and dribble some thinned PVA glue over the top to fix everything in place. The isopropyl alcohol acts as a flow agent, allowing the PVA glue to penetrate into all of the little nooks and crannies. Once the PVA is dry, it's time to install these elaborate pediments on either side of the foam core wall. I'll be using 3-in-1 Advanced Craft Glue for this operation, and I apply it only to the exposed edge of the pediment. Then place it against the foam core and press everything together. Flip the piece over, and now apply adhesive to the entire surface. Fit everything into place, and you guessed it, more clamps. It's going to be hard to leave this alone for an hour or so. It's going to take some self-discipline. I can't resist trying the door one more time. Once the adhesive has set up, I can now add the little side walls that are going to enclose the secret garden doorway. To join the walls together, I'm using a layer of 3-in-1 Advanced Craft Glue and little wooden pegs snipped from the ends of toothpicks. It's just so fun to open and close the door. This is how this small section of wall is going to fit into the Secret Garden diorama. I can't wait to share the rest of the project with you. Next time, we're going to focus on some delightful miniature garden accessories. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Until next time, bye.